Thank you, Celia. So, when I heard this story, the first thing that came to my mind was, wow, there's a popular quote that I heard sometime that says that wrong relationships, wrong marriages have ruined many great destinies. Yeah. And then it just reminded me that when there's a calling on your life, for someone like her that's got such a big calling on her life, you can't just marry anybody. So the first thing that came to my mind was the foundation of the marriage was faulty in the first place, right? And then, she also had this, you know, problem that many Christians have, unfortunately, about religious mindsets. It's true that God says, the Bible says that I hate divorce, says the Lord. God hates divorce, but God also loves you. God, when that statement was made in the Bible, what God had in mind when He made that statement was that He expects you to marry right, to choose right according to His will. Okay, so when people like her get it wrong in marriage, because obviously she married the devil. She definitely married the devil. She didn't even marry the devil's child. She married the devil. And then because of this religious mindset that people are always saying that divorce is a sin and all that, it has kept so many people bound in marriages that she didn't have any business being in that marriage in the first place. Okay. And then the Bible also says that wisdom is profitable to direct, because some people think that with this religious mindset that God says he doesn't like divorce and all that. It also doesn't mean that when you're in a wrong marriage, such as she found herself in, it doesn't mean that you cannot flee, especially when it's domestic violence. It's okay to divorce, because this conversation is going on around now and so many people are being liberated and delivered that it's okay to divorce when you find yourself in a marriage that's bringing you more pain than joy, bringing you more sorrow, because marriage is a blessing. And you can imagine that the blessing of God makes rich. It adds no sorrow and no painful toil. And this woman lived in sorrow. She lived in perpetual sorrow. I watched a video, an interview that BBC Igbo News, they interviewed her sister and her one of her sisters, then her twin sister, and then her mom. It was just so heartbreaking. They knew about this domestic violence, but they didn't know the extent. And then they said that each time they tried to, they've always tried to tell her to come out of it and all that. But because she always said to them, that she would kneel that, and that's the same thing that her pastor said, because pastor has come out now to say, what he knew about her marriage. She would tell people, she would go on her knees and tell them to pray that he's going to change. But the problem is, you cannot change a wrong person to be a right person. Yeah, and what she didn't know was that it's okay to get it wrong, and it's okay to get redirection from God. Hell, because there are so many music ministers in Nigeria particularly that have gone through divorce and they've remarried and they're thriving in ministry. I don't know if you guys know Nikki Laoye.
Nikki Laoye, yeah.
She was divorced some years ago and now she just remarried. She remarried like last month.
Yeah.
And she's been thriving in ministry. She's been invited so many times in UK to minister and all that. So when people are saying, oh, what would the church say? That is a lie from the pit of hell, because people will always talk when you divorce. Yeah, as long as you hear from God, that's fine. Because at some point in your life, when you have a calling on your life, you have to decide whether you want to please man or to please God. Because if you heard from God, you don't have to worry about what anybody said, because the church will talk. Yes, they will talk, but then again, it's gonna die down after a few months.
But do you, Amaka, do you think she didn't hear from God, or she hadn't heard from God, or she could not hear from God? Because this thing was was happening for a very long time.
Yes.
And for someone like her who ministers, and I mean, when she sings, when you're in the auditorium, when she performs, you think God, you believe that God is there. So now how people would argue or find it difficult to believe that she didn't hear from God. Or maybe I don't know.
Yeah, so you see, this is where self-will comes in, because self-will is so strong. Because for her, like I said, religious mindset is different from having a relationship with God. So for someone as anointed as her, she was already tied to this religious mindset, unfortunately, that limited God from even helping her. Yeah. So she was the one that hindered herself from being helped by pleading with people not to tell her pastor. And at the end of the day, I don't even think that telling her pastor was going to make any difference, much difference, because Some people, you can get them out or talk them out of such relationships. You can even separate them, and they find themselves running back to this, to the perpetrator. Yeah, there are so many instances of where even my close relative, my auntie, yeah, years ago, she was unfortunately a victim of domestic violence, and she was an ordained minister. She was going into her late 40s, and then she was desperate, and then she married this guy. She married the devil. The guy was like, physically abusing her and all that, and eventually she died. But guess what? Twice they said that elders from the village sent people. She had like so many stepbrothers. She was living in Lagos at the time. Twice they went to physically remove her from there, but she pleaded with them, you know, that she was going to stay with him and that he was going to change. So it's still that the religious mindset. A lot of Christians have this religious mindset that limits God. God cannot override someone's self-will. God would want you to use your free will to choose his will. So self-will is so dangerous when it comes to issues like this. Okay. It's not just about her being helped. It's about her deciding to take the help, right? Because I would say those people close to her mom, her siblings, one of the music ministers that she performed the song with, and then even her music producer, they were all aware, right? And then her twin sister said on several occasions she went to Abuja at the Dunamis International for one of their conventions, some of their conventions, and then the guy did not even let her see Osinachi, her twin sister, on several occasions, and she was stranded. Some of those music ministers that were her friends were helping the twin sister. And I'm thinking, this man cut this girl away from her family. She had 4 children, and you know how it is in Igbo tradition. I think that even in every tradition in Nigeria, that when you have a child, your mom comes for Omugo. Do you know she had 4 children? This man did not let her mom come to visit.
Wow.
He cut her off. Had all those children. Yes, he cut her. Yeah, he cut her off from her entire family. So that was enough cause for alarm. And I'm thinking, one of those people, the music ministers, people in the choir that knew, why didn't one of them tell the pastor what was happening?
So right? Are you saying in all of this, the pastor didn't know at all?
Because I don't see a reason why he would lie about it. Yeah, because he can always say he knew about it, but she refused to leave. But he said he didn't know about it, and I believe that even before he said it, right? And I'm thinking, even if the pastor helped, right, she was bound to still go back to this man. Possibly, So at the end of the day, I believe that nobody is to blame. It was her choice. And I'm saying that because years ago, I was in a relationship many years ago, right? And then the way the guy was talking to me, I used to tell my friends, this guy will beat me one day because of the way he was talking. When somebody is upset, you can tell that they have the tendencies. So most of the time, these guys have the tendencies, right? You could see the red flags. But because you feel like, you have to marry at a certain age, you rush into that marriage, regardless, thinking that person would change. And then one day, what happened? This guy beat me. And the way he was beating me, he was beating me. And then what came to my mind was, he was beating me as if I could do nothing.
Wow.
And then I said, I'm going to call the police. And I dialed the emergency button, and then he left me. But you know how this country is. Once you dial, right, it just goes through. Whether you tap it or not, once you touch it, it just goes through. Next thing I knew, 2 police officers came, but he knew he already ran away. And then obviously before then, because of the way he used to behave, the tendencies that I saw, I knew that I wasn't going to marry this person. It was a no-no for me. And then when he did it, and I like telling people when I tell the story, that it was just that once, and I ran away and I never looked back. Right? So at the end of the day, people see these tendencies. You can't tell me that the way, because there's this girl on Instagram. I don't know if you saw that girl that she canceled her wedding, her upcoming wedding.
I saw it.
She canceled her wedding.
I'm proud of her.
And so this situation is empowering so many people to say no.
So why did she cancel the wedding? I don't think I saw that.
No, because she said the guy was already abusing her. So they've been engaged for a year. They did like the bride price, that like the initial introduction. And then they said their traditional wedding, and then the white wedding to be this coming Saturday. But because of this situation, she chose She chose herself. So it's all about. So this guy took.
Are you saying because of this Osinachi's incident, she chose?
Yeah, that's why.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's empowering so many people. And then you see, this guy took away her entire identity, her self-worth. And I'm not surprised to hear that this guy is promiscuous, like he has somebody else somewhere. Because obviously that marriage is about marrying your friend, but clearly she married her enemy. The enemy, the Bible says the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's what this guy did over time. He stole her entire self-worth, her identity. He stole her entire family. He cut her off from everybody that was supposed to help her. He cut her off from her finances. He was controlling her finances. And there's one thing I noticed that's consistent with most, not all of these people, victims of domestic violence. The guy controls their finances. They are the breadwinners. This girl was the breadwinner. I saw on Instagram again about one lady that says she left her marriage years ago and that she was the sole breadwinner and that the guy was controlling her finances. The guy was mean and wicked to her and horrible to her, and that she left the marriage years ago. So there's one thing that's consistent. These people are begging for love, begging to be loved by the same enemy. By the same enemy that hates them. For me, this minister Osinachi, her husband hated her. And then how do you stay in a marriage, lying in the same bed with somebody that you can't even predict what they could do, right? So because this domestic violence thing is a spirit that possesses these people. Because when that guy beat me that once, right? I looked at his eyes and I'm like, this is no longer this person. There is something that has possessed this person. And thankfully, thank God that I had common sense. There was something that possessed him. So when they start beating these women, right, they're no longer themselves. You know how people with mental health would say things like, oh, they had a voice telling them to do whatever. So when they start beating, they're no longer themselves. They could do anything. That's why this guy had the nerve to stomp on her chest. This girl died of pain, chest pain, or whatever stuff that was wrong with her chest. Yeah? Because he was stomping on her chest. Because his mission, like I said, there is, for someone that has a calling on her life, when you have a calling on your life, you can't just marry anybody. And then when you get it wrong, it's okay to go back to God and get wisdom to leave the marriage. But she wanted to stay because she thought divorce was a sin.
Yeah.
You know? So it's just so unfortunate that she married her enemy.
Yeah, because Talia made a comment and said, we should be marrying our friends, our best friends, right?
Yes.
But come on now, the marriages and relationships these days, I think that one has gone through the window. Why do you think this is? Is it because people just so much want to be married, they don't really care to marry their best friends anymore? Or what? Or is it that they married their best friend and then that best friend now becomes their worst enemy? What is going on there? Amaka, let me come to you with that. Why are people no longer, because everybody say, I want to marry my friend. I want us to marry. But when, I don't know, please.
I know. Yeah. So a friend, what is a friend? A friend is somebody that, your companion, right? Somebody that makes your life better and not bitter. Okay. So a friend is somebody that helps you and doesn't hinder your greatness, right? So for her, it's not even a question of marrying her friend or not marrying her friend. It's a question of once you find out that what you thought is no longer what it is, right? You just have to make a decision about, with your children in mind, okay? Yeah. And then with regards to people no longer marrying their friends, I think it's just a case of, rushing into marriage, so that's why people don't wait to marry their friends. And besides, when you meet someone, you guys are supposed to like align in so many places, like, you align in the same beliefs, you have the same core beliefs. Because that friendship and the core belief is what's going to sustain that marriage, apart from the fact that, in cases where domestic violence comes in.
Do you guys not also think that the availability of women these days kind of waters that down? Because a man might say, who has time to be forming friendship with you? I just want to marry and move on to the next. Let me just have that title that I'm a married man.
Yeah, but it's a matter, but the women are to blame because they're settling for less.
Yeah.
Settling for less is a choice.
It's high time pastors started making that altar. But if you know your husband or your wife is beating you, step onto this altar.
Celia, guess what? Guess what? Right? In the church where I attend, domestic violence, we have zero tolerance, and it's been spoken of in so many sermons. And then, even when this thing happened, right? Pastor Paul, and then her pastor, he released old and recent videos where he was talking about domestic violence. So it's not as if she didn't know that domestic violence, there was a zero tolerance.
Amaka, when I listened to that his preaching or that his sermon, right, it was quite confusing because he said God, the church does not condone divorce. Right? And then he said, if you know you cannot love another man's daughter, return her to to their father. So I was a bit confused, and I said, at what point are you talking about the return? You know, I really don't know. Maybe you
No, he's saying that the church has zero tolerance for domestic violence. That's what he said. So he said they have zero tolerance for violence, and if you know that you're going to be abusing someone's daughter, then you return the person.
Okay, so, but at the same time, when he's saying that the church, he also said that divorce is not of God. He also said that, right? Because I heard it. He said it. So I'm asking, and he says, if you are not in love, if you don't love her, return her instead of beating her. So I'm saying, okay, so for how does he expect the woman to process this? A woman who is in a domestic violence situation and wants to leave, but then the pastor has said divorce is not of God. So what can she do then?
At the end of the day, your pastor is not God. That is one thing I know, right? So you know that's why relationship with God is very important and not religion. Relationship is so important, because when you're in a situation like that, you would ask God for help. And there's no way you're going to ask God for help sincerely.
And the thing about it is not
without him giving you the solution. For her, the solution was to leave that marriage. The man was not going to change.
It's not about just asking. It's about receiving.
That's what I'm saying. Yes. To receive it as well.
To receive it and act on it.
Yes.
Receive and act. Move.
So it's not just about what the pastor is saying. It's about what you have resolved to do yourself. Very Celia, for me, once you flee domestic violence, don't go back. Do you guys remember the story of that girl? I think at the start of the pandemic in Nigeria, she was married to this guy. They had children, like 2 or 3 children, and then they separated. And then he lured her to get to his house. Do you remember? Tied her to a chair and then stabbed her.
And used plier to remove her.
And used plier to, yes. And they were separated. She went back to him. Yeah. So that's a lesson to a lot of people. Yeah. Once you flee domestic violence, for me, that's it. Don't even go back, because it's not going to end well.
Yeah. Because somebody that was green and you left because the person is green.
Yes.
You're going to come back and you're going to be dark green. There's no option that's going to change that color.